It began with a whisper. A single, seemingly innocuous message passed through the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. But in that quiet moment, the world as we knew it trembled. You might think you understand the royal family, the protocol, the tradition, the perfectly choreographed public appearances, but what happened next shattered all expectations. The Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, beloved by millions and once thought untouchable, had suddenly become a target of what insiders are calling King Charles's fatal decision. And the most shocking twist? Another man, virtually unknown to the public, had stepped into the spotlight, Sir Timothy. Overnight, he was declared the new Duke of Sussex, a title that had defined Harry's identity, his legacy, and his very place in the monarchy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Can you imagine losing a title that has been part of your life since birth in a matter of hours? How would you respond to being replaced by someone you've barely crossed paths with, someone who the world now looks to as the embodiment of your former privilege? That's the question Prince Harry faced. And while the cameras captured only the polished, composed figure of a prince appearing in public, the truth behind those closed doors tells a very different story. A story of betrayal, of secrecy, and of decisions that could change the monarchy forever. The rumors started weeks earlier, as these things often do. Quiet mutterings in the corridors, ambiguous comments during high-level meetings, and cryptic reports in the media that seemed too strange to believe. Harry at odds with the palace was the headline that barely scratched the surface. Beneath the surface, sources claim, tensions had reached a boiling point. Arguments, disagreements over public engagements, disputes over titles, even rumored leaks of sensitive information, all of it fed into a narrative that no royal advisor could ignore. And then came the day of reckoning, when King Charles reportedly made the decision that no one saw coming. Strip Harry of the Duke of Sussex title and hand it to someone completely unexpected. Sir Timothy, a name that until recently barely registered in public consciousness, was suddenly at the center of a storm that could engulf the entire royal institution. But who is Sir Timothy really? That's the question that everyone is asking. The palace describes him as a long-standing confidant of the royal inner circle, a man of impeccable discretion and loyalty. Yet the timing of his elevation raises eyebrows. Why now? Why replace a prince who has captured the world's attention with someone who has never been part of the public narrative? Is this simply a strategic move by King Charles to consolidate control, or is there a more personal motive at play, one that could involve old grievances, hidden alliances, or even revenge? What is clear is that the ramifications of this decision go far beyond one man. This is not just about Harry or Sir Timothy. It's about the very future of the monarchy, about precedent, about tradition, and about how power is exercised behind closed doors. And then there is the public reaction, or more accurately, the shockwave that followed the announcement. Imagine turning on your television, scrolling through headlines, or opening a news alert, only to find that the Duke of Sussex you thought you knew has been stripped of his title. The name Sir Timothy begins appearing everywhere, plastered across tabloids, trending on social media, and debated by pundits across the globe. The mixture of disbelief, outrage, and curiosity is palpable. Who is this man? How did he rise so quickly? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for Harry, for Meghan, and for the royal family as a whole? You can feel it in the tension that has gripped the palace. Sources say private meetings were held, advisors were called in urgently, and strategies debated long into the night. Some were loyal to Harry, some aligned with King Charles. Yet all seemed to understand one thing. History was being written in real time, and there would be no turning back. Every action, every decision, every glance carried weight. The palace had to navigate a minefield of emotion, duty, and optics, knowing that the world would scrutinize every move, every statement, every nuance. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of this story is the human side. Beyond the pomp and ceremony, beyond the public appearances and press releases, this is a tale of people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Prince Harry, a man who has spent much of his life under the scrutiny of the public eye, suddenly stripped of a title that defines his very identity. Sir Timothy, thrust into the limelight overnight, suddenly expected to perform, represent, and command respect in a role that once belonged to another. King Charles, facing a decision that could define his reign, balancing tradition, family loyalty, and the pressures of a modern monarchy. Each of them is navigating a storm that is as personal as it is public, as emotional as it is political, as unpredictable as it is inevitable. And so we find ourselves at the beginning of a saga that will unfold in layers of revelation, conflict, and intrigue. There are letters that have surfaced, conversations overheard, alliances formed and broken, all leading to the moment when the title of Duke of Sussex changed hands. There are whispers of old debts being settled, of long-hidden grievances coming to light, and of decisions made in moments of private tension that would shock the world once revealed. Every detail matters. Every nuance counts. And every revelation sets the stage for the next twist in this royal drama. So, the question you must ask yourself is this: what really drove King Charles to make this decision? Was it strategic, personal, or something else entirely? And perhaps even more importantly, how will Prince Harry respond? Will he accept his fate, or will he fight back in ways that could reshape the monarchy once again? As we delve into this story, you will hear from sources, witnesses, and insiders. You will see the connections, the betrayals, and the alliances that define this crisis. And by the end, you will understand why this moment is not just about a title. It is about power, legacy, and the unpredictable nature of human ambition. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It all started with a message that nobody expected. A simple email, or so it seemed, sent to one of the most senior aides of the royal household. Short, vague, yet the implications were seismic. In a matter of hours, whispers turned into rumors, rumors turned into urgent meetings, and meetings turned into a crisis that could not be contained. What had happened to Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, who had long been considered untouchable, nearly invincible in the eyes of the public? How had it come to this, that a royal prince, adored by millions, was now facing the possibility of losing a title that had been his for life? Imagine the tension in that room. Courtiers pacing, advisors speaking in hushed tones, phones buzzing with messages from anxious allies. Every glance carried meaning. Every pause was a calculation. Those closest to Harry reportedly could see the storm approaching, yet even they could not fully anticipate its size. One insider described the atmosphere as electrically charged, like you could cut the tension with a knife. They knew something monumental was about to unfold, but no one knew exactly what or when. It wasn't just a matter of titles. The Duke of Sussex was more than a name or a position. He was a symbol, a public figure, a living narrative the world followed. Stripping a royal of such a title is not something that happens lightly. History shows these decisions are rare, momentous, and usually steeped in political or personal consequence. So why now? And why Harry? Sources close to the palace claim tensions had been building for months. Disagreements over public engagements, clashes about messaging, and reports of leaked documents created an environment of distrust. Was it Harry's growing independence, his outspoken nature, or a perceived threat to the traditional hierarchy? Perhaps it was a combination of all these factors. What is clear is that the stage was set for a confrontation the monarchy could not avoid. And yet, despite the mounting tension, Harry reportedly had no idea how close he was to losing everything. Friends say he was focused on charitable work, preparing for upcoming events, even planning a private family gathering. The ordinary life of a royal in public view continued, but beneath the surface, a political storm was brewing. How often does the public see only the surface, unaware of the conflicts simmering behind palace walls? And when those conflicts erupt, what happens to the person caught in the eye of the storm? Sources indicate that King Charles's inner circle had been debating the consequences of Harry's actions and public statements. Advisors were split. Some argued that stripping Harry of his title would send a clear message about loyalty and the sanctity of royal duties. Others warned of the fallout, international backlash, public outrage, and a potential fracture within the family. It was a gamble of enormous proportions. Every decision had ramifications that could echo for decades. But what truly pushed this crisis to the breaking point? Reports suggest that a combination of missteps, miscommunications, and perceived breaches of trust created an atmosphere in which King Charles felt he had no choice but to act decisively. Whether Harry had actually done anything deserving of such a drastic measure, or whether perception alone was enough, is a matter of debate. Yet perception in the monarchy is powerful. How the public interprets events, how media frames stories, how insiders leak information, all of it shapes reality. And in this case, it seems perception outweighed everything else. Friends of Harry recount late-night calls filled with worry and confusion. Emails that should have been routine became sources of stress. Small incidents, misunderstood words, overlooked invitations, disagreements over minor details were suddenly magnified into a narrative of insubordination and tension. It is a reminder that in the world of royalty, nothing is truly small. Every detail matters. Every action is scrutinized, and even a minor slip can become a catalyst for monumental change. Imagine being in Harry's shoes. You are living under the world's gaze. Every move is analyzed, every word dissected, every choice questioned. And yet, one day, your status, your title, your identity is suddenly in jeopardy. What would you do? How would you respond? Do you fight publicly, risking further scandal? Or do you retreat, protect your family, and hope the storm passes? These are not theoretical questions. They were Harry's reality at that moment. Meanwhile, the palace was moving quickly. Private meetings were held in confidential chambers, documents reviewed, strategy sessions convened. The question of loyalty dominated every conversation. Who could be trusted? Who would support the king's decision? And, perhaps most importantly, who would be willing to step into the void left by Harry's removal? This is where Sir Timothy enters the story, but that revelation was still hours away. Inside Buckingham Palace, emotions ran high. Some aides reportedly broke down, unable to reconcile their personal loyalty to Harry with their professional obligations. Others steeled themselves for action, knowing that in moments like this, history waits for no one. How often do we consider the emotional toll of these decisions on those tasked with executing them? The public sees the announcements, the headlines, the formal statements, but the human experience behind those announcements is often invisible. Then there were the leaks. In today's digital age, secrets rarely stay hidden for long. Rumors began to surface online, cryptic tweets, unnamed sources quoted in tabloids, social media posts hinting at a coming scandal. These leaks created pressure on the palace to act quickly and decisively. Waiting could make the situation worse, allowing speculation to spiral out of control. Yet acting too fast carried its own risks. Every decision had to be carefully weighed, every consequence anticipated. At the center of it all was Harry, reportedly unaware of the exact timing of his impending loss. Friends say he was blindsided, caught between disbelief and outrage. The shock of realizing that a title so integral to his identity could be taken overnight is almost unimaginable. How does one process such a change when it is not only public but irrevocable? How does a person navigate the conflicting pressures of family loyalty, public image, and personal dignity when everything they have known is suddenly under threat? And then, in a move that would ignite speculation for weeks to come, the palace reportedly identified a successor. Someone loyal, someone discreet, someone who could step into the role of Duke of Sussex with minimal controversy, or so they hoped. This decision would set the stage for Sir Timothy's rapid ascent. But at this point in the story, the public had no idea who he was. All they knew was that a crisis had erupted, that a prince's title was at risk, and that the monarchy was on the brink of a dramatic transformation. Questions swirled, both inside the palace and outside in the public sphere. How did it come to this? What could have been done differently? Was this the result of personal conflicts, political maneuvering, or a combination of both? And most importantly, how would Harry respond when the world finally learned the truth? These questions created an atmosphere of suspense, tension, and anticipation that would dominate the narrative for weeks, months, and perhaps even years to come. The storm was only beginning. Behind closed doors, decisions were being made that would affect not just one man, but the entire royal family, the monarchy as an institution, and the public's perception of it all. And while the cameras and headlines captured the surface-level events, the real drama unfolded in private meetings, whispered conversations, and strategic calculations that few would ever witness. But what came next would not just affect Prince Harry. It would change the balance of power, reshape public perception, and introduce a new figure into a story that was already full of tension and intrigue. The arrival of Sir Timothy as the unexpected contender for the Duke of Sussex title would send shockwaves that reverberated far beyond the palace walls. And when the announcement finally came, the world would be forced to confront a reality that seemed almost too dramatic to be true. What drives a king to make a choice that could fracture his family, his court, and the very institution he is sworn to protect? That question has haunted palace insiders for weeks, as whispers of King Charles's fatal decision began leaking into the public sphere. To understand the gravity of what happened, we need to step inside the corridors of Buckingham Palace, where history and personal conflict collided in ways no one could have predicted. It began with tension, the kind that creeps slowly, almost imperceptibly. Reports suggest that King Charles had been monitoring Prince Harry's actions and public statements for months. Advisors say there were repeated disagreements over Harry's engagements, media appearances, and even the tone of his public messaging. What might seem like minor disagreements on the surface were, in the eyes of the king, signs of a growing pattern, an erosion of trust, a challenge to the hierarchy, and a disruption of the carefully maintained balance within the monarchy. Think about it. How does a monarch reconcile the love for his son with the duty to protect the institution that has endured centuries of tradition? That question haunted King Charles as he considered what many have described as the unthinkable. Every advisor in that room knew the stakes. If Harry was allowed to continue unchecked, the monarchy's public image could suffer, and precedent could be set for future conflicts. But if action was taken, the risk was just as grave: family rifts, media outrage, and a storm of public scrutiny that could last for years. Sources claim that the king's inner circle debated endlessly. Some argued for patience, diplomacy, and private negotiation. Others insisted that decisive action was necessary to assert authority and maintain the integrity of royal titles. The tension in these meetings reportedly reached a fever pitch, with aides pacing the hallways, advisors speaking in hushed but urgent tones, and ministers privately questioning the wisdom of any action that would single out the Duke of Sussex. Every option carried consequences. Every delay amplified the risk, and yet the final decision would fall squarely on the king himself. The decision-making process, according to insiders, was not purely political. Emotional factors played a role. King Charles is, by all accounts, a man deeply invested in his family's cohesion. Yet he also carries the weight of centuries of tradition. To him, the title of Duke of Sussex represents not just a name, but a legacy, a responsibility, and a symbol of continuity. The idea of the title being used in a manner he perceived as potentially damaging to the monarchy may have created an internal conflict, one that required him to act in a way that balanced familial loyalty with institutional preservation. Imagine sitting in that room, knowing that your choice will ripple through the lives of your son, your advisors, and the nation. Every argument, every counterpoint, every possible outcome had to be weighed. What if the public turned against the decision? What if Harry reacted in ways that escalated the crisis? What if the move alienated supporters both within the palace and across the Commonwealth? Yet, inaction carried risks of its own: perceived weakness, further defiance, and the possibility of losing control over the narrative. And then came the moment of clarity. Sources describe a private meeting late one evening, when King Charles reportedly concluded that only one course of action could preserve the monarchy's integrity. Harry would be stripped of his title as Duke of Sussex. The decision was reportedly made not out of malice, but out of necessity, a cold, calculated move designed to protect the institution, even at the expense of personal relationships. Yet even as the decision was finalized, questions lingered. How would Harry respond? How would the public perceive it? Would the media spin it as a betrayal, a family feud, or a justified act of leadership? Every contingency had to be considered, every potential fallout anticipated. Those in the room knew that history would judge this moment harshly, regardless of the king's intent. What makes this decision even more dramatic is the timing. Sources claim that the king chose to act when he did because he felt the situation had reached a tipping point. Reports suggest that Harry's growing independence, his media appearances, and the ongoing leaks had created a perception of instability. King Charles reportedly felt that delaying action any longer would risk a loss of authority that could be irreparable. In his view, a decisive move, though painful, was necessary to assert control and send a clear message. But there was more than just institutional strategy at play. Emotional undertones reportedly colored the discussions. Courtiers speak of a sense of betrayal felt by the king, of disappointment in a son whose actions appeared to challenge the family's hierarchy. Some insiders even claim that personal grievances, long simmering beneath the surface, influenced the decision. While these reports cannot be independently verified, they add another layer of intrigue to an already dramatic story. Advisors reportedly cautioned that the decision must be communicated carefully. It was not enough to act. The world had to understand why. Leaks were controlled, briefings were planned, and a strategy for public messaging was devised. Every word, every nuance, every angle was scrutinized. The palace knew that missteps in communication could amplify the crisis, turning a calculated move into a public relations disaster. Meanwhile, Harry remained largely unaware of the precise timing and severity of the impending action. Friends report that he was focused on his charitable initiatives and family life, completely blindsided by the magnitude of the decision looming over him. Imagine the shock of realizing that a title so integral to your identity could be stripped away almost overnight. The sense of disbelief, betrayal, and fear must have been overwhelming. How do you process the sudden loss of status, reputation, and legacy all at once? How do you respond when you realize the very institution that nurtured you is taking action against you? And yet, while the decision was dramatic, the palace moved with calculated precision. Senior aides coordinated with the media team, briefed key stakeholders, and ensured that when the announcement finally came, it would have maximum impact while minimizing potential chaos. The palace's objective was clear: protect the monarchy, assert authority, and introduce a successor who could step into the role with credibility. That successor, Sir Timothy, was being prepared for an unprecedented elevation, though the public had yet to see or hear his name. By the time the world learned of the decision, the wheels had already been set in motion. The story of a title stripped from a prince and handed to an unexpected figure would dominate headlines, spark endless debate, and create a public spectacle unlike anything the monarchy had seen in decades. Experts in media and public relations reportedly describe it as a textbook case in crisis management, but also a perfect storm of drama, intrigue, and personal tension. And yet, even with all the planning, there was no certainty about the outcome. Human emotions, public perception, and unforeseen consequences can never be fully controlled. How would Harry respond? How would the public react? Would Sir Timothy succeed in navigating a role that had once belonged to another? And how would King Charles reconcile the personal cost with the perceived necessity of his actions? The stakes could not have been higher. The decisions made in those rooms, in those quiet corridors, would ripple through the monarchy, the family, and the world. Every advisor knew it. Every aide understood it. And yet, there was a sense of inevitability, that the moment had come when difficult choices had to be made. The palace, the public, and the royal family itself were about to witness a transformation that few could have predicted, one that would change the balance of power and redefine the legacy of the Duke of Sussex title. But what came next would astonish the public even more. A rise from the shadows, a figure no one expected, and the first hints of Sir Timothy's dramatic entry into this unfolding saga. Who exactly is Sir Timothy, and how did a man so little known to the public suddenly ascend to one of the most prestigious titles in the British monarchy? That question has dominated conversations from London to Los Angeles, from the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace to every trending tab on social media. One day, he was a trusted advisor, a quiet presence in the palace, largely invisible to the outside world. The next, he was declared the Duke of Sussex, stepping into a spotlight that had belonged to Prince Harry for decades. Sir Timothy's rise is a story that blends preparation, opportunity, and timing, though many would say the speed and circumstances of his elevation are nothing short of shocking. Sources suggest that he has long been a fixture within the royal inner circle, quietly earning trust through discretion, competence, and unwavering loyalty. Unlike others who have sought public acclaim, Sir Timothy reportedly preferred to operate behind the scenes, managing sensitive matters and offering counsel that often went unnoticed by the media. His discretion, ironically, would now become one of the reasons he was chosen to inherit a title in crisis. But timing is everything, and timing was everything in this story. By the time King Charles made his decision to strip Prince Harry of the Duke of Sussex title, the palace needed someone who could be trusted to step in seamlessly. The choice of Sir Timothy reportedly came after long discussions and deliberations, weighing loyalty, capability, and public perception. Advisors reportedly concluded that he had the credibility, temperament, and discretion necessary to navigate the role without inflaming further controversy. Yet despite these careful calculations, there was still risk. The public had no connection to him, no familiarity, and no reason to trust him as the successor. Sir Timothy's first public appearance as the new Duke of Sussex was carefully orchestrated, designed to introduce him without overshadowing the sensitivity of the situation. Observers note the striking contrast between his calm, measured demeanor and the whirlwind of speculation surrounding the announcement. While Harry's absence loomed large, Sir Timothy projected an image of competence and steadiness, a man ready to shoulder responsibilities under extraordinary circumstances. But projecting confidence is one thing, winning public acceptance is another. Could the public embrace a figure who, until hours earlier, was virtually unknown outside palace walls? The palace reportedly worked meticulously to manage the narrative. Leaks were controlled, strategic statements were issued, and carefully selected photographs of Sir Timothy were released to establish credibility. He was portrayed as a figure of integrity, someone who would uphold the traditions of the monarchy while navigating modern challenges with tact and judgment. Yet behind these polished communications, palace insiders admit there was tension and uncertainty. Would the public accept this unexpected shift? Would Harry's supporters push back, creating unrest? And most importantly, could Sir Timothy maintain his composure under the intense scrutiny that would define the coming weeks? Sources close to the palace described the first reactions as mixed. Some senior courtiers reportedly expressed relief, believing that Sir Timothy's elevation could stabilize a volatile situation. Others were skeptical, questioning whether someone so little known could command respect in a role historically associated with public visibility and popularity. Meanwhile, international observers watched with fascination, analyzing every photo, every statement, and every subtle gesture for clues about the monarchy's internal dynamics. This was not just a domestic story, it had global implications. Public curiosity grew almost instantly. Social media erupted with speculation. Who is Sir Timothy? What qualifies him? And what does this mean for Harry's legacy? Headlines splashed across newspapers and websites. New Duke of Sussex. The rise of Sir Timothy. Harry replaced. Meet the man taking his place. Royal shock. A title changes hands overnight. For many, it was difficult to reconcile the calm image of the new Duke with the dramatic circumstances of his appointment. Questions abounded. How did a man so private ascend to a position so public? What was his relationship with King Charles? And what had Harry's response been, if any? Even within the palace, emotions ran high. Sources described Sir Timothy himself as aware of the weight of the responsibility he had inherited. He was reportedly briefed on the public perception, prepared for media scrutiny, and advised on every aspect of his new role. Yet personal reflection, insiders say, was inevitable. How do you step into a position historically defined by another, especially under circumstances charged with tension and controversy? How do you navigate loyalty to the family while respecting the predecessor? These questions were not hypothetical. They were the immediate reality of Sir Timothy's life. Interestingly, Sir Timothy's background offers clues to his ability to navigate these challenges. Sources suggest he had long experience in advisory roles, crisis management, and negotiation, often acting as a discreet problem solver within the palace. Unlike other royal aides who operate in the public eye, he had honed skills of discretion, judgment, and influence that made him uniquely suited to step into a high-stakes situation without creating additional controversy. In this sense, his rise was less about sudden opportunity and more about a career quietly preparing for a moment that few could have foreseen. But while competence is essential, perception is everything. The palace reportedly took careful steps to introduce Sir Timothy in a manner that would build credibility while avoiding direct comparison to Harry. Images, public appearances, and carefully worded statements were all part of a coordinated effort to frame the narrative. Yet even with meticulous planning, there were challenges. Critics questioned whether a man so little known could truly fulfill the expectations of a role historically associated with charisma, public engagement, and a deep connection with the people. Would the public accept the new reality, or would nostalgia for Harry dominate the conversation? The human dimension of this transition cannot be underestimated. Harry, of course, was at the center of the emotional fallout. Sources say that learning of Sir Timothy's elevation reportedly hit him hard, blending shock, disbelief, and perhaps a sense of betrayal. How do you process the sudden replacement of your identity in the public sphere? How do you reconcile the personal and public aspects of such a dramatic change? Friends say that Harry retreated into private reflection, seeking counsel from trusted confidants, yet the inevitability of the palace's decision loomed over him. Meanwhile, Sir Timothy faced a different set of challenges. He needed to navigate expectations both inside and outside the palace. He had to demonstrate his legitimacy to senior courtiers, advisors, and royal staff, while simultaneously projecting an image to the public that commanded respect and confidence. Every handshake, every smile, every word carried significance. The scrutiny was unprecedented. Could he maintain composure while under such relentless observation? Could he step into a role steeped in tradition while establishing his own authority and identity? And then there was the question of legacy. The Duke of Sussex title, once associated with Harry's persona, his charitable work, and his public image, now belonged to Sir Timothy. Could he honor the history of the title while forging his own path? Could he manage the inevitable comparisons, critiques, and expectations that would define his early tenure? Observers noted that this was not merely a ceremonial appointment. It was a test of resilience, diplomacy, and psychological fortitude. Public fascination only intensified as glimpses of Sir Timothy's life emerged. Reports of his quiet diligence, strategic thinking, and long-standing service to the crown painted a portrait of a man capable of handling immense pressure. Yet the contrast between his calm, measured demeanor and the public's perception of Harry's charisma and popularity created tension. Could a relatively unknown figure sustain public interest while fulfilling the demands of royalty? And behind it all, the palace remained acutely aware that the story was far from over. Harry's reaction, the media's scrutiny, and the international gaze meant that Sir Timothy's entry into the Duke of Sussex role was only the beginning of a larger saga. This was not a simple replacement. It was the start of a narrative fraught with emotion, ambition, and intrigue. Every move, every statement, and every appearance would be dissected for signs of success, failure, or hidden tension. But what came next would push the story into uncharted territory. The public was about to witness Sir Timothy's first official appearances, while the royal household braced for Harry's response. Rumors, leaks, and speculation would intensify, setting the stage for confrontations, revelations, and dramatic turns that no one could have predicted. The world was not prepared. The moment the announcement went public, the shockwave rippled through media outlets, social media feeds, and dinner table conversations alike. Headlines screamed, notifications pinged, and commentators scrambled to analyze what had happened. Prince Harry stripped of Duke of Sussex title. Sir Timothy named successor, read one tabloid. Royal shakeup. Unknown advisor becomes Duke, declared another. The story dominated the news cycle, trending globally within minutes. It's easy to underestimate the power of an announcement like this. To the palace, it was a carefully planned statement, designed to control the narrative and minimize chaos. But to the world, it was a bombshell. Millions had followed Harry's journey, his charity work, and his very public life. The Duke of Sussex was not just a royal title holder. He was a symbol of modernity, a bridge between tradition and contemporary values, a figure who had captured imaginations across continents. And suddenly, he was gone from the role, replaced by a figure no one outside the palace had ever really known, Sir Timothy. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. On social media, hashtags erupted. Hashtag Save Harry, hashtag New Duke, hashtag Royal Crisis. Memes, GIFs, and commentary flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. People debated the legitimacy of the move, the ethics of replacing a prince, and the possible motivations behind King Charles's decision. Some expressed outrage at the perceived betrayal, while others praised the king for decisive action to preserve the monarchy's integrity. Newsrooms reported that international coverage was equally intense, with commentators in Europe, North America, and Asia analyzing what the shift meant for the royal family, the monarchy, and global perception. Inside Buckingham Palace, the announcement triggered a flurry of activity. Sources say senior aides were monitoring social media reactions in real time, tracking both the sentiment and the volume of attention. Advisors were coordinating with media outlets, arranging interviews, and preparing talking points. Every detail was scrutinized. Every potential misstep was anticipated. The palace understood that the world was watching, not just the headlines, but the subtleties. Sir Timothy's demeanor in public appearances, Harry's response, and even how other royals would react. But the story was more than media frenzy. It was a psychological shock for those closest to the monarchy. Friends and supporters of Harry reported feelings of betrayal, sadness, and disbelief. How could a prince, a beloved member of the family, be stripped of his title in such a decisive manner? Meanwhile, supporters of King Charles argued that the decision was necessary, emphasizing loyalty, tradition, and the responsibilities associated with royal titles. The debate was heated, emotional, and deeply personal, reflecting the complexity of the situation. Analysts quickly began speculating about the timing and reasoning behind the announcement. Why now? Why Sir Timothy? Some suggested that King Charles had waited for the perfect moment to maximize control and minimize chaos, while others speculated about personal grievances, strategic planning, or a desire to send a message both within and outside the palace walls. What is clear is that every theory, every speculation, every rumor added fuel to the fire, amplifying the shockwave. One particularly intriguing aspect of the announcement was how it highlighted the contrast between public perception and private reality. To the world, it appeared as a sudden, dramatic shift, a prince replaced almost overnight by a previously unknown figure. Yet insiders reveal that the decision had been deliberated for months, with careful planning, contingency measures, and consideration of every possible outcome. The disparity between what the public saw and what occurred behind closed doors created a tension that would dominate discourse for weeks, if not months. Harry's immediate circle reportedly experienced the shock as deeply personal. Close friends described calls filled with panic, disbelief, and urgent strategizing. How could this happen? What should they do? How could the news be framed to protect Harry's reputation while navigating the delicate dynamics of family and institution? Even allies outside the palace were forced to confront the reality. The monarchy had made a bold, irreversible decision, and Harry was powerless to prevent it. Meanwhile, Sir Timothy faced his own unique pressures. The announcement thrust him into the public eye under extraordinary circumstances. Observers noted the contrast between his poised, measured public appearance and the storms swirling behind the scenes. The expectations were enormous. Maintain the dignity of the Duke of Sussex title, navigate media scrutiny, and assert authority in a role historically associated with visibility, charisma, and public engagement. Every word, every gesture, every interaction would be dissected by millions around the world. Could he succeed where Harry had been both adored and scrutinized? Internationally, the news triggered widespread analysis. Commentators in Europe discussed the implications for the monarchy's image. Journalists in North America speculated on media spin, and experts across Asia examined the stability of royal institutions in light of such a dramatic shift. The story was no longer confined to the United Kingdom. It had become a global spectacle, a case study in power, legacy, and the intricate web of family dynamics that define one of the world's most watched institutions. The media coverage was relentless. Every appearance, every interview, and every social media post became a potential flashpoint. Analysts noted that even seemingly minor interactions, such as Sir Timothy's handshake with the king, a wave to the public, or a brief statement to reporters, were dissected for meaning. Was it a display of confidence or nervousness, loyalty or self-interest? Every detail contributed to the narrative, shaping public perception and intensifying the sense of drama. And yet, for all the spectacle, the human element remained at the core. Harry, once confident and visible, now faced the reality of his displacement. Reports suggest a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and anger. The palace, while focused on narrative control, could not shield him from the emotional impact of losing a title that had defined so much of his life. Friends describe a man grappling with the personal and public consequences simultaneously, an emotional storm that mirrored the literal storm of media attention outside. As the announcement settled into public consciousness, one thing became clear: the story was only beginning. The shockwave had been sent, but the aftershocks, Harry's response, Sir Timothy's navigation of his new role, public debate, and media scrutiny, were still unfolding. The palace was bracing for an escalation, aware that the initial announcement was merely the first chapter in a saga of intrigue, emotion, and transformation. And in the midst of all this, a critical question loomed over every discussion, every headline, and every analysis. How would Harry respond? Friends, advisors, and even strangers speculated. Would he retreat into private life, seek to reclaim his title, or find another path entirely? Could the monarchy contain the fallout, or would public sympathy shift irrevocably toward the displaced Duke? These unanswered questions created an atmosphere of anticipation, tension, and relentless curiosity. But what came next would deepen the crisis, spark unprecedented controversy, and reveal secrets that had long been buried in the shadows of the palace. How does a man process the sudden loss of a title that has defined his identity, his public persona, and even his sense of self? For Prince Harry, the moment the announcement of Sir Timothy's elevation went public was nothing short of seismic. Friends say that the initial shock was paralyzing. One day, he was the Duke of Sussex, a role he had inhabited with pride, carrying not only ceremonial responsibilities, but also a deeply personal legacy. The next, that identity was stripped away, replaced by someone he barely knew, a figure who had operated in the shadows for years, suddenly thrust into the glaring spotlight. Sources describe a whirlwind of emotions: disbelief, anger, betrayal, confusion. Harry reportedly spent the first hours after the news in private reflection, seeking counsel from trusted confidants. How could this have happened? Why him? Was this the culmination of tensions he hadn't fully understood, or the result of a calculated move by King Charles? Friends say he asked himself these questions repeatedly, each answer offering only more uncertainty. It is important to understand the emotional weight of such a moment. Publicly, Harry has been a figure of poise, navigating intense scrutiny while advocating for causes he believes in. Privately, however, the experience of losing a title, something that is both symbolic and tangible, can be devastating. It is not merely about prestige. It is about identity, family bonds, and a sense of belonging. How does a man reconcile his love for his father and his duty as a son with the sting of a public rebuke that has real consequences? How does he process the fact that the world is watching every reaction, every statement, and every nuance? Reports indicate that Harry's immediate reaction involved a mixture of retreat and strategy. He withdrew from public appearances for several days, focusing on personal reflection, family discussions, and careful consideration of next steps. Friends describe him pacing, writing notes, making calls, and analyzing every possible scenario. What should he say publicly, if anything? Should he respond privately? Should he confront King Charles directly, or allow the palace to manage the narrative? Every choice carried potential risks and consequences. Some sources suggest that Harry's retreat was also a strategic move. By stepping back, he could observe the reactions of the public, the media, and the royal household. How would Sir Timothy handle his new role? How would the public respond to the unexpected change? Could he use the pause to plan a more measured response, or to protect his family from further scrutiny? In the high-stakes world of royalty, even inaction is a calculated decision. Yet despite the careful planning, emotions inevitably surfaced. Friends describe late-night conversations filled with frustration, moments of despair, and flashes of anger. It felt personal, one source said. It wasn't just a title being taken away, it felt like a part of him was being erased. These insights underscore the human dimension of the crisis. While the palace and the media focused on the public spectacle, the private turmoil was equally profound, involving psychological and emotional stress that few outside Harry's inner circle could fully comprehend. Complicating matters were leaks and rumors that began circulating almost immediately. Friends say that Harry was aware that information was spreading, but he could not control the narrative. Every social media post, every news headline, every opinion piece became a mirror reflecting both public fascination and speculation. How could he respond without escalating the situation? How could he protect his personal life while the world dissected his every move? These questions amplified the sense of isolation and urgency. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Reports indicate that discussions within the royal household were tense, emotionally charged, and often contradictory. Some senior family members reportedly expressed empathy for Harry, acknowledging the difficulty of his position. Others were aligned with the king's decision, emphasizing the necessity of maintaining order, tradition, and authority. Navigating these conflicting loyalties required careful judgment, and Harry reportedly spent hours considering the implications of each potential action. In the midst of this, Harry's advisors reportedly recommended a two-pronged approach. First, to retreat from the public eye temporarily, allowing emotions to settle and public reaction to be monitored. Second, to prepare for strategic communication, ensuring that any statements made would be measured, precise, and impactful. Friends describe Harry as methodical, weighing the pros and cons of every potential move. Yet, even with careful planning, the emotional weight of the situation was unavoidable. How does a man reconcile personal hurt with public responsibility? How does he maintain dignity when every decision is scrutinized and potentially politicized? Social media, of course, did not pause for reflection. Hashtags continued to trend, commentary flooded in, and speculation about Harry's next move intensified. Analysts reported that public sentiment was divided. Some expressed support and sympathy, while others criticized perceived entitlement or questioned his reactions. This digital firestorm added pressure, forcing Harry and his advisors to consider the timing and content of any potential response. Every post, every interview, every public appearance could either calm tensions or inflame them further. Meanwhile, Sir Timothy's emergence compounded the psychological complexity. Friends report that Harry was simultaneously assessing the public reception of his successor and grappling with feelings of displacement. How could someone so little known assume the title he had held for decades? Could Sir Timothy manage public expectations, or would he stumble under the pressure? And what did this mean for Harry's legacy, both in the public eye and within the family? These questions dominated his thoughts, creating a mixture of strategic calculation and personal reflection. One insider noted that Harry's reaction was not purely emotional. He reportedly began documenting his thoughts, collecting information, and considering all avenues for potential action. Legal, media, and public relations experts were consulted. Every detail of his private life was analyzed for potential impact. Friends describe him as focused, determined, yet quietly grieving the loss of a title that had symbolized both personal achievement and familial connection. In addition to the personal and strategic considerations, there were also broader symbolic implications. Losing a title as prominent as Duke of Sussex is unprecedented in modern times. How does such an event resonate with the public? How does it affect perceptions of fairness, loyalty, and justice within the monarchy? And how does it influence international observers, especially those invested in the traditions and symbolism of the British royal family? Harry reportedly understood that his situation was not merely personal. It was emblematic, a narrative that would be analyzed, debated, and mythologized for years to come. Even in retreat, Harry's influence remained significant. Allies report that he continued to communicate privately with trusted confidants, maintaining a level of control over certain narratives while preparing for the possibility of a more public response. Every decision was weighed against the potential for both personal satisfaction and broader impact. Could he reclaim the narrative, or would the palace's carefully orchestrated messaging dominate the conversation? And yet, despite all the planning, one reality persisted. The emotional toll was immense. Friends described moments of solitude, reflection, and even tears. The loss was deeply personal, intertwined with issues of identity, family loyalty, and public expectation. How does a man process such a profound personal upheaval in the glare of global attention? How does he maintain composure, purpose, and dignity when the world seems to have shifted beneath his feet? As the days following the announcement unfolded, Harry's retreat became both physical and strategic. Private gatherings, confidential meetings, and silent contemplation defined his response. But the world continued to demand a story, and media speculation intensified. Every minor movement was reported, analyzed, and interpreted. Every rumor, every leak, every post added to the pressure. Friends note that Harry was acutely aware of the stakes, not just for himself, but for his family, his legacy, and the very perception of the monarchy he had been born into. And then came the letters, messages, and private communications, some leaked, some kept confidential, that hinted at a deeper, more complex story behind the decision. Some suggested miscommunication, others hinted at hidden agendas. Whatever the truth, these revelations only intensified the emotional and strategic landscape Harry had to navigate. But what came next would escalate the crisis even further, introducing hidden secrets, internal confrontations, and revelations that would force both Harry and the palace to confront realities far beyond a single title. What if the story of Prince Harry losing the Duke of Sussex title wasn't just about a single decision, but about secrets buried for years, finally coming to light? That is the reality unfolding behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. Sources reveal that letters, emails, and private communications, long hidden from public scrutiny, played a pivotal role in both the king's decision and the ensuing turmoil. Some contained warnings, others revealed grievances, and a few hinted at alliances no one outside the inner circle could have anticipated. The first of these letters reportedly surfaced weeks before the official announcement. Handwritten, discreetly circulated, and marked confidential, the notes outlined concerns about Prince Harry's recent actions. Insiders suggest that advisors and senior aides repeatedly urged King Charles to consider the implications of Harry's independence, media appearances, and controversial statements. Every memo, every note, and every communication painted a picture of a royal intention with the institution, a figure whose actions, whether intentional or perceived, threatened the carefully constructed hierarchy of the monarchy. One particularly controversial letter allegedly contained pointed critiques from a senior royal aide, warning that Harry's continued autonomy risked undermining the monarchy's credibility. The language was described as measured yet unmistakably urgent. Observers say that reading the letter would have sent a clear message: action must be taken. While these communications may have been intended to advise, not dictate, they reportedly influenced King Charles's perception, creating a sense that decisive intervention was inevitable. But letters alone don't explain the full picture. Hidden agendas, some dating back years, also played a significant role. Sources suggest that certain advisors, deeply loyal to the king, had been quietly steering decisions behind the scenes, subtly shaping narratives, and framing events in ways that would support a particular outcome. Was this a coordinated effort to protect the monarchy, or did it reflect individual ambitions? The answer is murky, but the effect was undeniable. When the decision to strip Harry of his title was finally made, it was both a personal and political move, shaped by layers of influence, persuasion, and strategic communication. Some letters hinted at personal grievances, long-standing frustrations, perceived slights, and unspoken tensions. Reports suggest that these grievances had festered over years, influencing perceptions of Harry's actions and intentions. While publicly, the monarchy emphasizes unity, loyalty, and decorum, privately, the dynamics were far more complex. The letters revealed frustration over perceived challenges to authority, disagreements over protocol, and even resentment over media narratives. These were not simple disputes. They were intertwined with emotion, history, and a profound sense of legacy. Leaked communications also revealed conflicting loyalties within the palace. Some aides expressed sympathy for Harry, advocating for a measured approach that would preserve relationships and avoid public scandal. Others pushed for decisive action, arguing that the integrity of titles and tradition could not be compromised. This internal tug-of-war reportedly influenced how and when the decision was communicated, adding layers of tension to an already volatile situation. Then came the documents that shocked insiders. Private letters from individuals outside the immediate royal circle, offering perspectives, advice, or warnings that would shape events. Some were from former advisors, others from family friends, and a few even from international figures monitoring the monarchy's stability. Their contents were, according to sources, startling, detailed accounts of missteps, observations about public perception, and strategic recommendations that may have tipped the scales in favor of removing Harry from the Duke of Sussex title. The letters also revealed a striking contradiction. While Harry was publicly portrayed as autonomous and assertive, many communications painted him as reactive, vulnerable, and at times, unaware of the broader implications of his actions. Some advisors argued that his well-intentioned independence was misinterpreted as defiance, while others contended that he had, in fact, challenged the monarchy's authority more than was acceptable. The tension between perception and reality became a recurring theme, one that underscored the complexity of the decisions being made behind closed doors. Hidden agendas weren't limited to Harry's actions. They also involved those now surrounding Sir Timothy. Sources claim that some communications subtly advocated for an alternative successor, someone who could uphold tradition while navigating the delicate political landscape. Sir Timothy's name began appearing in these letters, highlighted as a candidate whose discretion, loyalty, and competence made him ideal for a crisis scenario. Whether this was a genuine endorsement or a calculated strategy to shift power behind the scenes is still debated, but the result was undeniable. Sir Timothy emerged as the logical choice to replace Harry. There were also communications that directly implicated external pressures. Leaks, media speculation, and the intense public interest reportedly reached the palace in real time, influencing decisions and framing the narrative. Some letters expressed concern that failure to act decisively would invite further scrutiny, rumors, and potentially destabilize the monarchy's public image. The cumulative effect of these hidden pressures, communicated both formally and informally, contributed to the sense that action was not only necessary but urgent. And then, there were the revelations that cut deepest. Personal letters that suggested the king's decision was influenced not only by institutional concerns, but by perceived betrayals, strained relationships, and complex emotional dynamics. Friends say that these letters, read in private, likely confirmed fears, justified caution, and ultimately provided the rationale for a course of action that would have profound consequences for Harry, Sir Timothy, and the monarchy at large. The interplay between secret letters and hidden agendas illustrates the intricate web of influence surrounding the decision. It wasn't simply a matter of stripping a title. It was a coordinated, multifaceted response to decades of tension, compounded by real-time events, public scrutiny, and long-standing loyalties. The result was a perfect storm. A public announcement that shocked millions, a palace navigating intense scrutiny, and a new figure stepping into a role that had been defined for generations. Even as the letters and agendas came to light, the human cost remained central. Harry reportedly felt blindsided, betrayed, and disoriented. Friends describe long conversations, reflections on past decisions, and attempts to understand why this had happened now. Every communication, every note, every leaked message became part of a larger narrative, intertwining personal emotion with public spectacle. The palace, meanwhile, continued to manage the fallout with precision. Advisors coordinated messaging, monitored public response, and prepared for the possibility of further revelations. Every step, every statement, every appearance was scrutinized for potential impact. The stakes could not have been higher. The secret letters and hidden agendas had set the stage, but the unfolding drama was far from over. And then came the whispers, rumors of alliances, strategic moves, and private confrontations that no one outside the inner circle could fully see. These developments hinted that the removal of Harry and the rise of Sir Timothy were only the beginning of a saga filled with intrigue, emotional conflict, and surprises that would leave the world watching, questioning, and waiting for the next twist. But what came next would take the palace intrigue to a level no one could have anticipated, revealing the power struggles, strategic gambits, and personal confrontations that would define the crisis in the days to come. In a world where appearances are meticulously curated and every gesture carries meaning, the real drama often unfolds behind closed doors. That is exactly what was happening within Buckingham Palace as the fallout from Prince Harry's removal from the Duke of Sussex title intensified. Behind the gilded doors, aides, advisors, and courtiers were engaged in a high-stakes power play that would determine not only the immediate handling of the crisis, but the future of the monarchy itself. The first rule of palace power is that influence is both subtle and absolute. Every conversation, every whisper, every recommendation carries weight. Sources reveal that senior aides were divided into factions almost immediately following the announcement. Some aligned themselves with King Charles's decision, emphasizing loyalty, protocol, and the preservation of tradition. Others quietly sympathized with Harry, warning that public backlash could escalate if the situation was handled without nuance and care. The tension was palpable, and the stakes could not have been higher. Strategic meetings reportedly occurred in rapid succession. Advisors weighed options for media messaging, ceremonial appearances, and contingency planning. Who would speak publicly? Who would manage Sir Timothy's introduction? How should Harry's absence be framed to minimize perceived humiliation while maintaining authority? Every decision required careful consideration, because even minor missteps could be magnified into international headlines. Insiders described the palace as a place of constant calculation, where loyalty, ambition, and timing intersected. Courtiers and aides who had previously operated quietly now found themselves thrust into a maelstrom of influence. Alliances shifted almost daily. Individuals who had been close to Harry in private moments found themselves negotiating their positions, trying to balance personal loyalty with professional survival. The palace had become a chessboard, each actor positioning themselves strategically for the moves to come. It was not just strategy at play. Emotion fueled every interaction. Sources reveal that frustration, resentment, and anxiety were rampant. Some advisors reportedly resented Harry for the perceived disruption his independence had caused. Others were irritated by the sudden emergence of Sir Timothy, a figure who had quietly built influence but had rarely been seen in the public eye. Every conversation contained layers of subtext, every directive carried a hidden message, and every alliance concealed the potential for betrayal. Sir Timothy's rise added a critical dynamic to this internal power play. Courtiers who had previously exercised influence in managing Harry's public role now had to adjust, recognizing that the new Duke of Sussex was a man whose loyalty to the king and whose discretion made him a formidable player. Reports suggest that some senior aides worked tirelessly to brief him, ensuring that he understood not only the ceremonial responsibilities of the title, but also the intricate social and political dynamics he now had to navigate. Meanwhile, Harry's supporters inside the palace reportedly began to mobilize discreetly. They offered counsel, developed messaging strategies, and even explored potential avenues for reconciliation or response. The palace, however, was keenly aware that any overt support could be interpreted as opposition to the king's decision. This delicate balancing act created an atmosphere of constant tension, where every word and every action could tip the scales in one direction or another. The palace power play extended beyond internal factions. Advisors were also tasked with managing relationships with the media, government officials, and international observers. The monarchy is a global institution, and every action resonates beyond the United Kingdom. How would foreign media interpret the transition from Harry to Sir Timothy? Would allies of the crown perceive this as a necessary consolidation of authority or as a dramatic overreach? Strategists worked to anticipate these questions, preparing statements and briefings to shape perception and control the narrative. One particularly intriguing element of this internal maneuvering involved the management of information. Sources reveal that certain leaks were carefully orchestrated to test public reaction or to shift attention away from potential controversies. Social media analysts, palace communicators, and media liaisons worked in concert, monitoring trends, sentiment, and emerging narratives. In some cases, minor stories were strategically released to influence perception, creating a controlled chaos that kept the public engaged while protecting the monarchy's core objectives. Yet even as these strategies unfolded, personal relationships within the palace were strained. Courtiers who had once operated harmoniously now faced difficult choices. Loyalty to Harry, personal ambition, and dedication to King Charles intersected in ways that created friction, secrecy, and occasionally, confrontation. Sources describe whispered conversations in corridors, subtle manipulations in meetings, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that would have been invisible to the public eye but were critical in shaping the course of events. In addition to the internal power struggles, advisors were acutely aware of the emotional and psychological dimensions of the crisis. Harry's reaction, Sir Timothy's adjustment to his new role, and the perceptions of the broader royal family all required careful management. How could the palace maintain authority without alienating key figures? How could they control public perception while honoring the complexities of family dynamics? Every decision was fraught with nuance, requiring both strategic acumen and emotional intelligence. Sources indicate that King Charles himself played an active role in the palace power play. While delegating much of the day-to-day management to senior aides, he reportedly monitored developments closely, intervening at key moments to ensure alignment with his vision. His presence added a layer of authority but also tension. Advisors had to navigate both the king's expectations and the unfolding dynamics among courtiers. Decisions were rarely straightforward, and even minor miscalculations could carry significant consequences. Another factor in the palace chessboard was timing. The elevation of Sir Timothy was not only a symbolic move, it was a tactical one. By managing the announcement, orchestrating appearances, and controlling initial exposure, the palace sought to maximize impact while minimizing potential disruptions. Every press release, every photograph, every public interaction was meticulously planned. Yet insiders acknowledged that even with this careful orchestration, the dynamics within the palace remained volatile. The interplay between strategy and human emotion was perhaps most evident in moments of private council. Sources describe aides and courtiers debating not only what the public would perceive, but also how Harry, Sir Timothy, and other family members might react behind closed doors. Every scenario was imagined, every contingency considered. The palace was attempting to navigate an unprecedented situation with precision, knowing that the smallest misstep could reverberate for months, even years. And yet, despite careful planning and meticulous execution, uncertainty remained. No matter how skillfully the palace managed the public narrative or internal coordination, human reactions, emotional, unpredictable, and sometimes irrational, could never be fully controlled. This uncertainty fueled tension, elevated stakes, and created a sense of anticipation that permeated every corridor, every meeting, and every whispered conversation. But what came next would challenge the palace's ability to control the narrative even further. The world was about to witness Sir Timothy's first public appearances, media scrutiny at its peak, and reactions that no one could have fully